start by just asking you to kind of just give a quick intro of yourself, and then we can start on the questions. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Lauren Renlund, and I'm a Canadian dietitian. I currently live in Edmonton, Alberta, and I am an IBS specialist. So I focus on digestive health. I have IBS myself, and for over 5 years now, I've written my website all about IBS and the low FODMAP diet. So I'm happy to be here today to talk a bit about digestive health.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out, Lauren. I really appreciate it, especially with a topic like this. I feel like it's so important to have that connection with someone that might be also going through something that, you know, a lot of probably people out there are going through. Can you talk a little bit about your journey and how it first started? Where what was that like? Getting diagnosed with IBS, and also what was that experience like for you in the initial years of it?
Yeah, it's definitely a journey. And it was really tough in the beginning. So for me, I had maybe some mild IBS symptoms as sort of like a teenager, young adult. But it wasn't until 2014 when I was in grad school doing my master's, the first fall of my program, and I had contracted a really bad gut bug, and I was actually really, really sick for over a week. Horrible digestive symptoms. It was awful, and afterwards, my gut was just never the same.
Wow.
After I had that gut bug, I had pretty bad IBS symptoms after that, even after I had fought off the gut bug and I was supposed to be back to normal, right? But I wasn't. I was definitely grateful that I had a good family doctor on campus who I worked with, and she was familiar with what we call post-infectious IBS. So it's actually a significant percentage of people with IBS develop IBS after having an infection like that.
Okay.
So for me, I was lucky that I got diagnosed pretty quickly, because for other people, it might take months and months to get diagnosed. But even with a diagnosis and knowing what was going on, it was still hard, right? Because my family doctor, she was great, but she couldn't really offer much to me aside from some medications. They didn't work great for me because I have IBS and IBS mixed, which is sort of a mix of symptoms, which can be trickier to manage sometimes. So I felt like I was sort of on my own, and that's when I sort of started trying to use nutrition to manage my symptoms.
Wow, what an experience. For people not maybe familiar with IBS, can you explain the impact on just your daily life and what that looks like?
Absolutely. So IBS can be so different for every person who has it, and it can have sort of a variety of different digestive symptoms, ranging from like mild to severe. And some of the most common symptoms are like changes to your bowel movements. So let's say constipation or diarrhea or both, which is possible. Yeah, go through the whole range of it. And also other sort of the lower digestive symptoms that are common, like a lot of gas and bloating and pain and cramping are some of the most common symptoms. But along with that, it's also very common for people with IBS to experience things like fatigue, trouble sleeping, even like it's connected to sort of anxiety and depression. So it can really have a big impact on your whole life, not just your gut, right?
Right. Yeah. And was this experience something that influenced your path in becoming a registered dietitian?
Yeah, it did. I had always thought that I would go into public health and community health, and I still do work in that area today. And I had this experience at the start of my master's of public health, but then it gave me a better appreciation for more clinical nutrition and especially digestive health. And so it made me realize just how much of an impact these digestive symptoms can have on someone's life, but then also at the same time, how much of an impact nutrition can then have on IBS and other digestive symptoms. And at the time, like, I mean, nowadays, a lot of people are interested in talking about digestive health, but back in 2014, it was really hard to find resources on this area. And I felt so alone. So it definitely motivated me. As soon as I had graduated to become a dietitian, that's when I started my website.
Oh, that's wonderful. And what would you say are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions that you encounter from the general public and also the medical community about IBS?
That's a good question because I think there's a lot of them. I think that I guess that one that I unfortunately see a lot is that because IBS is not life-threatening, right? Which is great, right? Like, of course, it's not like, let's say, colon cancer, something that can be quite dangerous, but just because it's not life-threatening doesn't mean it's not seriously impacting someone's life. So I think I have seen that a lot in the medical community where, and I know I can have that perspective too as a health professional where we can put more urgency and more care into something that is sort of like life-threatening and is a big priority, right? But unfortunately, that means that sometimes IBS can sort of get pushed to the side and isn't treated as a priority, even if it's really impacting someone's life and maybe even their mental health and sometimes their physical health as well, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not life-threatening, that doesn't mean that sometimes people might unintentionally lose weight because they aren't eating enough. They might develop nutrient deficiencies if they're avoiding certain foods. It definitely can still have an impact. So yeah, I think that probably one of the biggest misconceptions is that it's no big deal or that it's just sort of a joke, right? Like that someone just gets gassy sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And so tell me about FODMAP and what this food category is. Many of us don't even know, what the acronym stands for. So can you explain that to us?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely find that a lot of people are still new to it because it is actually based on relatively new research. So the acronym FODMAP basically stands for a certain category of carbohydrates that are more commonly triggers for IBS. And so they are highly fermentable in the gut, which means that they can potentially cause a lot of like gas and bloating and upset, and also can potentially sort of mess with maybe drawing too much water into the gut, which can lead to diarrhea. But so FODMAPs, if you want, I can say what it stands for, but you don't have to memorize it.
It's a long word, right?
Yeah, it is. You'll see why we call it FODMAP. So it does stand for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols.
Okay.
And yeah, so, and again, all that means is that it's these certain carbohydrates that are really fermentable, and people with IBS might be particularly sensitive to them. Like they might have some food intolerances to them that it might be making their IBS symptoms worse. So basically, there were some very smart researchers in Australia who sort of identified these different carbohydrates as potential triggers for IBS symptoms. they grouped them together and they created a diet, which they call the low FODMAP diet. It's an elimination style diet, which means that it's not like a weight loss diet. It's not some sort of trendy diet. It is a medical diet that is designed to help manage IBS symptoms and identify food triggers. So I always want to emphasize that it's a medical diet that's meant to be done with the help of health professionals. And it's also not a lifelong, long-term diet. It's meant to be an elimination diet. Essentially means that you're cutting out a certain group of foods for a short period of time. And then hopefully symptoms will improve, as they do for over 3 out of 4 people with IBS on the diet. Yeah. And then you will go and you'll test them systematically one by one to figure out exactly which ones trigger symptoms. Because the good news is, for the majority of people with IBS, not all of them are symptom triggers. So after they complete the diet, they can usually add some foods back in to increase variety.
Oh, interesting. That's great to know. And I like that you highlighted that this is not a long-term, a life, style complete change where all of these foods are completely off limits for the rest of your life. And
I definitely think I see that misconception probably online, where people are afraid they won't be able to ever eat these foods again. And that's not true.
And the interesting thing, when I was looking at the list of what's on the list of high, I guess you would call them high FODMAP foods. Yeah. A lot of them are healthy. It's not necessarily that these are unhealthy foods. It's more so that these may be a trigger for the IBS.
Exactly. You got it just right. That we're not saying that these foods are bad for you. They're not going to damage your gut, anything like that. We're just trying to figure out in a systematic way exactly which foods are triggering symptoms. And for some people, it might be healthy foods like onion or garlic or apples.
Did you yourself personally on this low FODMAP journey find some foods are more triggering for you personally and others you could incorporate back into your diet?
Yeah, I definitely did. I was very relieved to find that not all of them were big triggers. And also one of the most important things on the diet is actually serving size, quantity, because people, it's not like a peanut allergy, let's say, where you have a small amount and it causes a reaction. It's very, we call it dose dependent, or basically just means the more you eat, likely the more symptoms you're going to have. So for most of these foods, I found that I could have a small amount and be okay, but I learned exactly how much was the limit before it sort of tipped me over the edge and started causing trouble.
Gotcha. And so your website, you include a lot of recipes, and you've also written a cookbook with low FODMAP foods. Is that true?
Yeah, I have. That was really great experience. It actually came out just about 2 years ago this month. And I wrote it with a friend of mine, fellow dietitian, Audrey. And we really loved writing this book because I think we wanted to show that even if you have IBS, even if you have to be on a restricted diet, you can still eat really delicious foods.
And that's really cool, because I feel like the amount of foods this could eliminate from your diet, it can be quite challenging, especially to begin with, right?
Yeah, I hear that from so many people that they almost just don't know where to start with it, right? And I think a lot of people also focus so much on the list of foods not to eat instead of all the foods that are okay to eat on it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of people, I sort of teach like, okay, like, it's great if you can take like your favorite family recipes and just make some little swaps to make it easier, to make it low FODMAP. Like maybe take out the garlic, maybe add some other flavors instead. But for some people, that can be overwhelming. So in our cookbook, we decided to have a bunch of delicious recipes and also a 4-week meal plan in case people just had no idea where to start with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. How can people incorporate the low FODMAP diet into their lifestyle if they're also trying to work out and tone up and build muscle? Are the two mutually exclusive, or can they both exist at the same time?
Yeah, they can absolutely exist at the same time. I think that there's plenty of healthy foods and high protein foods, nutritious foods that you can eat on the low FODMAP diet. I do often encourage people with IBS, like let's say if they're starting the low FODMAP diet, like, hey, this is a big change. This is a lot of work. This should maybe be like your number one priority. And then once you sort of adapted to it, then maybe think a little bit more about maybe some other health goals, but you can absolutely be still lifting weights or running or whatever your exercise passion might be while you're doing this.
Switching from the IBS topic for a moment to your advice in terms of kind of topics that touch all of us in terms of nutrition. Are there any mistakes that you would like to see us stop making when it comes to losing weight and trying to work out and put on muscle? Are there common things that we do wrong that we kind of should stop from a nutrition standpoint?
Yeah, I for sure. And I think that what I see most often is, and it's actually sort of similar to IBS, is that people get really caught up on what foods to avoid, right? Or what foods not to eat, right? They focus too much on cutting out certain foods, limiting their favorite foods, and not enough on adding in more healthy foods. I really think that it's better for your body and also your mental health to focus on all the delicious, healthy foods you can eat, rather than having the negative approach and being like, oh, well, I can't eat this anymore. I'm not going to eat chocolate or whatever your favorite food is, right? I think that that approach is likely to make you miserable, where if you focus on like, hey, you know what, I'm going to try to and incorporate more vegetables, or I'm really going to try to have more fruit. Like, I'm going to try out a new salad recipe every week, like something like that. Focusing on all of the awesome healthy foods you can eat and trying to make healthy foods taste good. I think that's one of the best approaches. And related to that too, I think that a lot of people don't eat enough fiber, to be honest. And we know now how important fiber is, not just for our gut, but for our whole bodies. And also eating plenty of fiber foods, that's also feeding our healthy gut bacteria. And we know how important a healthy gut microbiome is. And not just for digestive health, but potentially for weight management as well. So we want to make sure we're eating plenty of fiber foods. And so that's plant foods like vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, whole grains, those type of foods.
Awesome. Are there any foods that you particularly like that sort of get overlooked maybe, but are really great options and good nutrition wise and taste wise?
That's a good question. I honestly, I think I'm going to say fruit for that. I think a lot of people are so quick to demonize fruit because it's sweeter than vegetables. But in reality, like the amount of sugar in a piece of fruit is quite low compared to our sort of modern processed sweets. And fruits have all the same important important nutrients like vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals as vegetables. Lots of fiber in it. So I think you can absolutely eat healthy, manage your weight, and still have fruit in your diet.
Awesome. That's a great one. You mentioned the gut biome, and I was wondering if you have any tips for us because it seems like there's so many products on the market now touting gut benefits, and they have
Mhm.
probiotics in them. Maybe as a consumer, are there certain things that we should be looking out for to choose a high quality probiotic, or are there specific types of supplements that we should kind of gravitate more so than to others?
Mm. Yeah, I think that I think a lot of people can get caught up on probiotic pills, which can have some benefits, especially for certain digestive symptoms. It might help, but really, is something that a lot of people don't realize is we already have our own little army of gut bacteria in our guts already, and so I think it's much more important to sort of like nurture our already existing gut bacteria rather than just taking like a single pill that's really just like sort of a drop in the ocean, right? Compared to what we already have. So eating a variety of plant foods and including those fiber foods, you're going to get lots of what we call prebiotics that way. Prebiotics are essentially food for the healthy probiotics that are in your gut. So whether that's having lots of plant foods, or there's also you can buy supplements that have prebiotic fiber in it. Personally, the one that I take and one that I recommend is called Fiber for IBS, because it is a fiber supplement that is low fermentable. So it's not very likely to trigger IBS symptoms compared to there's certain types of fiber, such as inulin, also called chicory root extract. We see that in a lot of fiber bars. That's a very fermentable fiber. And so for people with IBS, it can be a huge symptom trigger.
Interesting. And you mentioned that fermentable idea, and I'm wondering if you can explain for people that don't suffer from IBS, are these also foods that we should look to eliminate, or if we don't have symptoms, are they fine and nutritious and things that we should keep eating?
Yeah, really good point. So yeah, absolutely. These foods that are fermentable, absolutely. If you don't have IBS, if they don't give you symptoms, keep on eating it, right? Because part of what fermentable means is that the gut bacteria are eating it and sort of creating gas, right? So for people with IBS who might have a very sensitive gut, that increase in gas that might trigger the pain nerves in the gut, where someone with IBS might feel totally fine, right? So these fermentable foods can be really healthy. And yeah, it's totally fine to eat. I will say though that sometimes I meet people who start eating, maybe let's say they start buying these fiber bars and eating a couple per day and sort of go from 0 to 100 with a fiber and suddenly start getting really gassy and they wonder, oh my gosh, do I have IBS? I'm like,
Right.
No, I think you just are sort of overdoing it a bit. I think with fiber, fiber is great for you, but it's best to increase it slowly and while drinking lots of water.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction that you make there, because sort of there is a difference, isn't there, between just normal body function gas and that feeling when something has triggered something wrong and your body is over and like overstimulated with this trigger. Is that am I describing it correctly?
Yeah, I think so. And you're like, some gas is normal, right? Like we're humans, like
right.
like we all pass some gas. Like if we weren't passing any, then I'd be very concerned about your digestive system. Like wouldn't be working then. And even bloating, like we all naturally feel a little bit bloated after meals, right? Because we just ate some food, it's going through our digestion. It's not until that we have significant changes to our digestive system that is impacting our life and lasting long term. So, for example, let's say if someone, there's a big difference than maybe once in a while, once in a blue moon, experiencing constipation, or feeling constipated every week for months on end.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And yeah, so I definitely encourage anyone who experiences any digestive symptoms long term, more than just occasionally, to talk to their doctor, right? You want to get diagnosed. You don't want to assume you have IBS, because there are other digestive conditions out there. IBS is one of the most common, but you just want to know for sure what's going on before you try to treat it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I forgot to mention or ask you when you were describing your cookbook. I'm really curious. Do you have any favorite or standout recipes that you could kind of describe to us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, honestly, we have so many family favorite recipes in there that it's hard for me to choose a single favorite.
I'm
um,
sure.
yeah, and I'm honestly like someone who I always have my own cookbook like in my kitchen because I reference it all the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, which it's great to have like a collection of my favorite recipes. But I will say that one of them is adapted from my dad's recipe for maple mustard salmon. It's a great one that you just make this really simple sauce. You pop it in the oven. It comes out super great. It's a really easy salmon recipe, especially maybe for someone who's new to cooking fish, and they don't want to overcook it because that's when fish starts to not taste so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say that was sort of the first recipe that popped into my mind when you said that.
Oh, that sounds delicious. One more question for you. I don't want to take up too much of your time. What would be your advice? We're going into the new year. A lot of people are trying to, kickstart new habits and get healthy again. What's your advice for somebody that might be feeling overwhelmed with trying to maybe start a new workout, start a new nutrition program? How do you go about maintaining those healthy habits for the long term?
Mm-hmm. I think that it's important to remember, like, you don't have to do everything at once, right? Just because it's the new year doesn't mean it has to be the totally new you, right? It's okay to take it one step at a time. And I think it's actually healthier to go that way, right? We know that people often maintain habits long term when they sort of slowly add on healthy habits instead of just trying to change everything at once. So maybe instead of making a huge goal like, oh, I'm going to totally change my life and be ripped by summer, or I'm going to lose X amount of pounds in only a month, like maybe just take a look at what you're currently eating and think like, you know what, maybe it would be good if I start eating breakfast, or like, hey, maybe I'm actually going to try to eat some fruits instead of like sweet foods for snacks. Maybe you know that you don't drink a lot of water, and that might be a priority, right? Cut down on those sweetened drinks and have more water. I think that it can be such a great feeling when we make those small goals and achieve it, to then it sort of picture as a snowball, right? That accumulates over time, where then we can add on more of those healthy habits. I also will mention too that like you don't have to do it alone. There are so many dietitians out there, like in Canada. A lot of dietitians will work not just in hospitals, but also, for example, like in Ontario, it's called family health teams, and in Alberta, it's called primary care networks. Often, your doctor might be able to refer you to a dietitian, or if you're not in one of those networks, there's also plenty of dietitians who see clients privately. If you go to the Dietitians of Canada website, dietitians.ca, you can actually search for a dietitian in your area, or a dietitian who specializes in whatever area you want to learn more about.
Oh, that's awesome advice. Yeah, thank you for saying that. One more question. Where can people find you online if they'd like to follow you and know more about your recipes and cookbook?
Thanks. So my website is my name, laurenrenlund.com. And you can find me on social media, Facebook, Lauren Renlund RD. I believe on Pinterest and on Instagram, I'm the Tummy Troubles Dietitian.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah. And also on Facebook, I do have a Facebook group I run, and I have other dietitians who help me called Low FODMAP Canadians,
Cool.
which is just sort of a free support group for anyone who has IBS who wants to learn more about the low FODMAP diet. Can join for free and get recipe tips, all sorts of things. Finally, I'll say that also on my website, you can find a free low FODMAP grocery list, and can also sign up for my email newsletter to get regular IBS tips. I'd also recommend anyone who wants to learn more about IBS to definitely sign up for my newsletter, because I'm hoping in the new year, I'm working on creating an online course for people with IBS, a 5-step program to sort of learn how to identify their triggers, to learn how to manage their IBS using food.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing all that information.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for interviewing me and
Oh,
having
yeah.
such great questions.
Totally. It was a pleasure. Thank you for giving so much useful tips. I think anyone that's suffering could really use, and it's so good to hear that there are options and actionable things that we can do for ourselves.
Absolutely. And I just really want anyone with IBS to know that they aren't alone, right? I think digestive health and digestive diseases, it can be lonely, right? It's sort of like mental health where we don't often talk about it, but definitely not alone, and you don't have to suffer alone. There's a lot of options out there.